We're standing in one of the men's rooms right now. We know very little about the layout of the interior space. We do know that enslaved carpenters are installing berths, which we interpret as bunk-style sleeping arrangements that really suggest a communal kind of living arrangement within the rooms. How did we know the kinds of objects to put back in this room if we know so little about it from historical documents? Well, we can turn to the archaeological record to help us understand the daily lives of the enslaved people living at Mansion House Farm. In the late 1980s and early 1990s, archaeologists excavated a small 6-by-6-foot brick-lined cellar and found over 3 feet of refuse that had been generated from the enslaved people living in the quarter above. And that quarter was actually torn down in 1792 and 1793 to make room for the new slave arrangement that we're standing in right now. Within these layers of refuse, tens of thousands of artifacts were excavated. Over 80,000 animal bones were found that tell us about the diet of the enslaved people that were assigned to Mansion House Farm. 33 charred seed remains, nut remains, and field crops were also identified. 33 different species that tell us about the diversity of the diet of the enslaved people here. So when you come into this men's bunk space, you can actually see a mix of artifacts that have been provisioned by the Washington family themselves. Things like suits of livery and buckles for the shoes that would have been worn by house servants who were serving the Washingtons. But you also see a mix of objects that were procured or obtained by the slaves themselves. And so that includes some of these 80,000 animal bones and charred plant remains. Slaves received very small and meager rations, and so they spent their extra time after work at night and on the weekends doing some gardening to diversify those meager rations, and also some hunting and fishing and trapping. So we find all sorts of species of wild game, of fish, and of other wild animals that could create a little diversity and provide some nutrients that those standard provisions could not.